An Englishman, a Scotsman, and an Irishman walk into a bar. Each of them orders a pint of Guinness. Suddenly, a fly lands in each glass. The Englishman pushes his pint away in disgust. The Scotsman picks the fly out and keeps drinking. The Irishman grabs the fly and yells, "Spit it!" And that is, my friends, how global projects work. Look, we've got here one situation, the same goal, the same challenges, but so many different reactions and behaviors. And I picked just 3 guys from the same region. So can you imagine what happens if a Pole, an Egyptian, and a woman walk into a business meeting? If not really, let me help you with this. It was a few years ago, but I remember that day well. My team and I were welcoming our first ever client from a region different of Europe or America, from Africa, and to be more specific, from Egypt. So our Egyptian client, Jamal, walks in, and I stick out my hand for a handshake, but he just walks right past me. No hesitation, no second glance. He goes straight to my male colleagues to shake their hands instead. And there I am, standing like an idiot with my hand in midair. I swear I must look like a frozen Windows update. But you know what? That was not funny to me at the moment. But wait, it was even worse. Throughout the entire meeting, Jamal spoke almost exclusively to our technical team lead, acting like I was a part of the office furniture. But come on, I was the project manager responsible for the outcome of his project. And when we moved to Slack, the same story. Despite all the clear communication rules, he hardly ever messaged me and kept bombarding our tech lead instead. You may say it's a cultural thing or it's a religious thing, but Erin Meyer, who helps thousands of business leaders to understand cultural differences, has some other idea. She thinks that this behavior came from one of 8 key aspects that affect business situations. And Erin Meyer built a model which is called 8 dimensions of culture. Her model consists of 8 scales, which are as following: communicating, evaluating, persuading, leading, deciding, trusting, disagreeing, and scheduling. Each scale creates a continuum with countries placed along it. And as you can see, at each end of a scale, there are 2 opposite values. For example, let's have a quick look at this agreeing dimension. At one end, there is a confrontational approach, which means that if people don't agree with you, they will say it openly and they will want to discuss the differences. But at the other end, there is avoiding approach, which means that if people don't agree with you, they will not discuss the differences, and actually they will not openly express their disagreement. So this is like, for example, if you are working with Indian developers and you are sitting in a meeting room, you have a discussion, video discussion actually, and they are nodding their heads, so you think they agree with you, but not really. They are just not saying openly that they have a different opinion. Okay, but let's come back for a while to the story of Jamal. If Erin Meyer had been standing with us in the corridor at the time, what do you think she would have said about this situation? I think she would have said something about leading. Leading can be either egalitarian or hierarchical. Egalitarian leading means that this organizational structure is very flat, and very often you may not even recognize who is the boss if you are looking at the group of people sitting together in a meeting room. And at the other end, there is hierarchical approach, which means that authority is respected, that business positions are really very important, and communication very often follows a strict chain of command. And as you can see, Egypt has a much more hierarchical culture than Poland. So it means that business positions matter. And Jamal's position was equivalent to our technical team lead. So for him, it was obvious to contact him instead of me, the project manager. But also in highly hierarchical cultures, leadership is very often linked with men, especially in business situations. So that also may be a reason why Jamal was not very eager to cooperate with a female project manager. However, back then, I hadn't discovered this model. But shortly, I ended up with some other project, this time for Saudi Arabia client. So let me invite you to a brief autopsy of this project. Autopsy may suggest that the patient is already dead, but stay with me to see if the patient survived. And also, at the end, I will have some extra bonus for you. I'm going to share with you something I learned accidentally then about British people. And I'm very curious whether it would surprise you as it surprised me. Okay, let's start our autopsy. One of the biggest challenges I faced while working with Saudi client was not about shifting requirements or technical side, but it was about communication. My emails often went unanswered for days, sometimes even forever. And even if I did receive a reply, that was so general and unclear. And there were many phrases like, I will try, I will do my best, which were promising for me, but then nothing. So it really irritated me and I felt ignored. But I also felt that we got stuck with the project implementation. And then I came across Erin Meyer's model and it all suddenly clicked. I learned that Saudi culture is a high context culture, which means that they communicate in indirect way. So the meaning is rather implied than saying explicitly. And instead of expecting clear answers, I had to learn how to read between the lines. And that's completely the opposite of Americans with whom I used to work, because they are always clear and go straight to the point, unless it's about giving feedback, because that's a completely different story. I also learned that phrases like, I will try, I will do my best, weren't commitments. They were simply a polite refusals. But what surprised me the most was that emails were the wrong way to communicate. Saudis prefer WhatsApp over emails. This is because they really value relationships. And if they cannot meet face-to-face, they will use WhatsApp. So I switched. I started messaging instead of emailing. And you know what? Like magic, the answers started coming almost immediately, and even on Sunday. But thanks to this model, I also learned why some of my emails were totally ignored. That was because I was approaching wrong people. A couple of minutes ago, I mentioned that Jamal contacted our technical team lead because they were at the equivalent positions. So that was the same here. I was approaching people who were not at the same position as I was. And when I adjusted this, so I started approaching right people at the equivalent position of mine, almost all the roadblocks disappeared. But communication was not the only challenge I faced while working with Saudi. The other one was connected with how they perceive time, so with scheduling. And when I worked with German clients, everything ran like clockwork. We had a strict well-oiled system, which meant that every event was scheduled, every deploy was done regularly, and also every meeting was scheduled in advance with a fixed agenda and a very clear purpose. So there was no last-minute changes or surprises. But when I started working with Saudis, I had no idea that time worked differently there. And this is rather like suggestion. So scheduling regular meetings with them was hardly possible. And even if I did manage to do it, I'm not sure if my client ever was on time. In fact, more often than not, he had completely forgot we had one. And when we needed him to review some parts of functionalities we were working on, again, setting clear deadlines was out of question. So I think you can imagine what I felt. But fortunately, again, Erin Meyer's model came to rescue me. And I learned that Germans view time as linear. It is structured and sequential for them, and they really value functionality. And sticking to the schedule is also a big deal for them. But in Saudi Arabia, planning is highly flexible. And this is not because people are careless, but because they have to be. Their local rules, economy, law change so quickly that long-term planning just isn't realistic. Being able to adapt, that's a key. And once I understood that, I started relying rather on regular but still WhatsApp updates instead of scheduling video calls, or knowing that in a few weeks we would start working on some integration, I asked them in advance about details we would need for this. And as you can see, time is not universal. Time is cultural, and knowing how to read the clock properly can be a key to success. And to conclude this autopsy, let me share one more example of workshops that turned into a paintball game. My Saudi client was coming to us to Krakow for workshops. We would like to discuss the scope, plan next steps, break down the features. So I did what any prepared project manager would do. Where is it? I created a beautiful, detailed agenda. And now, if that had been my American client, we would have spent the whole day going over each feature in details with just a quick break for a lunch in the office. But remember that it was not my American client, that was my Saudi client. So he arrived a few hours late. Then I proposed him a coffee, and he started talking about his family, about his wife, then about his mother, who actually picked the wife for him. And you know what? He saw her face only after the wedding ceremony. And he ended with a brilliant story of beauty contest for goats. Yes, you heard me well. Beauty contest for goats. And that was what we were discussing during our workshops. Then he proposed lunch, so we went off. After coming back to the office late in the afternoon, I thought that we would finally start discussing the scope, the functionalities. But instead of this, he was painting a broad picture of the whole business context behind the project. And then he had another brilliant idea. Let's go play paintball. So we went, and yes, he completely beat us. But you know what? I was wondering why he even came to us. It really didn't make any sense for me. However, thanks to this model of 8 dimensions of culture, I realized that this special experience was shaped by a few different cultural aspects. But today I would like to focus just on 3 of them: evaluating, persuading, and trusting. Let's begin with evaluating. Evaluating is simply about giving feedback, and you can do it in a direct way or indirect way. Direct way means that you are saying openly about the things you don't like, and the focus here is put on negative aspects. But there are some cultures that prefer indirect feedback, which means that they will not say openly about the things they don't like because they don't want to make the other people feel uncomfortable. And this is what my client was doing, because throughout the entire meeting, he even didn't mention about any negative aspect of our cooperation, but believe me or not, that there were many tough moments. However, he didn't want to spoil the relationship between us, because that was very important for him. As you can see, Poland is at the completely different side of this scale. So now, maybe you understand why we Poles love putting others down so much. Because we are one of the countries with the most strongest direct negative feedback. We love it. And now you can feel free to complain. But I also said that this behavior was shaped by trusting. And in business, trusting can be built either based on tasks or on relationships. If you build trust based on tasks, it means that people to trust you and to make a business with you need to see how good you are at what you are doing. And if you are building trust based on relationships, it means that before they decide to do business with you, they need to make a personal relationship with you. They need to know you better personally. And again, this is what my client was doing. And in Saudi Arabia, trust is built slowly and personally. It's like cracking a coconut. Unlike in so-called peach cultures, where, like for example, the US or the UK, where people are open and friendly at the outside, but a bit deep down, reserved in deep down. By the way, have you ever noticed that Americans can tell you half their life story while waiting for a bus? But if you meet them again, they might not even recognize you. And this is the same in business. People seem to be friendly and open, but there is no real sentiment behind that. So this is not about the real deep relationships. Unlike in Saudi Arabia, where relationships come first and are deeper, but they require more time to be built. That was what my client was doing through all these strange for me activities like personal talks and playing paintball. He was building relationship with us because he wanted to make sure that he can trust us to do business with us. And the last dimension or scale I would like to discuss today is persuading. And at one end of this scale, there is a principle-first approach, which means that people are convinced by methodologies or researches that prove a method works. And at the other end, there is application-first approach, which means that successful case studies are more persuading for people. But both of these approaches have something in common. They rely on hard facts, details, or numbers to make a point. So they rely on something specific. As you can see, Saudi Arabia is not placed at this scale. And this is because they are out of scale. They are following a completely different approach, like any other Asian country. Instead of specific approach to persuading, they present the holistic. Saudi business culture is holistic first. So instead of breaking down each feature immediately, my client was giving me a full business perspective on the project because he would like to make sure I understood the why before the how. They need to, before going into specific, they need to see the big picture, the context, how everything fits together. And of course that at first I thought we were off track. But then I realized that we were just following a different process, which required more time, but made a perfect sense in his cultural framework. And by the end of his visit, we built a stronger relationship, and he trusted me more to lead this project. And honestly, also paintball game was a pretty great team building moment. Before I move to summarizing this autopsy, who would like to hear some embarrassing story connected with me and this client? All right, I'm gonna share it with you. And then the promised bonus about British people. So during the first meeting with this client, I addressed him by his first name and skipped his academic title. And I was completely unaware how important it was in his cultural framework. His reaction was subtle but very obvious. And I almost burned with embarrassment. You should know that in many Asian countries, using first name too soon is seen as disrespectful, not mentioning about skipping the academic title. However, that's not only me. Also global giants like Netflix have some similar experience. When Netflix expanded to Japan, CEO Reed Hastings approached meetings exactly as he did in Silicon Valley, in a very direct, informal, and casual way. And also, in one meeting with a senior executive Japanese, he addressed him by his first name and skipped straight to the business. So Netflix also had to adapt it to formal business rules in Japan. And now, here is the promised bonus. I'm going to share with you some phrases my long-term client from UK used frequently during our meetings. Then I'm going to show you how I understood them and what he really meant. And let's begin with, I would suggest. I really thought that he's saying, think about this idea because maybe it's worth doing. But what he really meant was, it's an order. It's not up to you. You have to do it. And then he very often was saying, that's interesting. And you know what? Even now, when I'm hearing this loudly, I can hear his voice in my head saying this phrase. And I thought he was impressed. But he wasn't. He was trying to say, I don't like it. And the last one, but my favorite one, it's my fault. And I thought it meant he made a mistake. But what he really meant was Agata made a mistake. And when I read Erin Meyer's book and I realized that the British tend to soften their feedback in such a strange way, I started paying a closer attention to phrases like this in our conversation. And you know what? Erin Meyer was damn right. So maybe you also should check your emails from British after this presentation. All right, and something happened with the presentation. All right, over the last few minutes, I share with you some examples of how differently we communicate, view time, persuade others, build trust, or give feedback. And, okay, thank you. And I think that my patient would ended up in the grave, but thanks to this model, we survived. And the patient didn't die because we stayed agile. We inspected and adapted to demanding clients, to the specifics of their work and their culture, shifting requirements. So we learned as we went and adjusted, and it paid off because at the end, the client wanted to work with us again on another project. And how about you? Have you ever felt that you were at the same page with your client or teammate, only to realize later that you weren't? If so, you have probably already experienced the impact of cultural differences. And to finish, I would like to invite you to think how you can use this model in your own work. Because maybe you can adjust the way you are communicating. If you are working with Indian developers, you should not expect clear information. But if you are working with Americans, you should be very clear and go straight to the point. You can think how you can build trust with your client. If this is the client from America, you should show them how good you are at your work. But if it is an Asian client, you should simply focus on relationships. But you can also simply adjust the way you are giving feedback. If this is the teammate from India again, you should be very subtle and indirect in your feedback. But if you are working with Germans or the Danes, I think they will appreciate the direct feedback. And by the way, if you would like to give me a feedback, This is my QR code for my LinkedIn profile. But even though I know I'm from Poland and I should appreciate the direct negative feedback, please be gentle this time. I think there are much more aspects you can take care of, and you will benefit from them. But I would like to wish you to stay open for cultural differences, to stay aware of them, and to stay ready to adapt to them. Simply to stay agile, because in global business, effectiveness and efficiency is not just about what you are doing, but first of all, how you are doing. Thank you.
Two minutes, and still our next speaker, I guess. Has to, don't worry, don't worry. If we have a question, we can accommodate. Oh, we have Denise. Oh, you ready? Oh.
Hello, thank you so much for your presentation. And, you know, I think on our ground in Poland, there is a lot of talking about the cultural biases, like both ways, Eastern and Western. And maybe it will be a funny question, but do you think that UK is prepared, or they are spending so much time on how to work with the Poles to say, for example, because, okay, Poles are super direct. So if they say the negative feedback, they don't mean anything harmful, but just this is the way they are, and they are thinking that they are improving something. Because I think that also geographically, we are like in the middle, and also within your role, when you are a coordinator of many different teams across the globe, it's kind of unnatural that you yourself adjust a little bit, hearing the communication, like translating in your head. I'm thinking about, do you think that the same perspective applies to UK, US, and India? Like, while talking to the Polish person, please be mindful that they are super direct, that's not what they meant deep in their heart.
Thank you for your question. First of all, I think that this is not connected with the geography. I think that you need to be personally aware of cultural differences, because when I started working with different companies from different parts of the world, I was not aware. Well, I've heard about this, but I thought it's a bullshit a little bit, because this is a business, so we all know the common rules. But basically, when I started working with countries from like Saudi Arabia, I realized that this really is important, because they really think the other way. And I think that you, first of all, need to be aware that there is something like cultural differences, and they impact the business communication. And honestly, looking at my clients, I'm not sure if they are aware of this. It is that I am rather adjusting to their culture than they are adjusting to ours. Thank you.